I'm going to take the unusual step of inviting you to join me in time travel this afternoon. I'm going to take us back in time, first of all. We're going to go, actually, fairly recently, we're going to go to the summer of 2021. They're playing, eventually, the Euro 2020 football finals. And this is a game in Copenhagen, and you might be in the ground. Some of you might have been in the ground. I was on my sofa. And it's been an interesting and balanced match between the home team, Denmark, and their local rivals, Finland. It's about 3 minutes before half-time. And the ball is about to be played, and there is a Danish winger running up the far side of the pitch. He is tall, he is fair, he is athletic, he is an athlete at the pinnacle of his career. This is a man who is fit enough to play football for his country. He's their leading goal scorer. And as he's running, something strange is happening. His legs are buckling. He is collapsing. He measures his length along the pitch, and he lies still. And one of his teammates runs over, and he feels for a pulse in his wrist, and he feels for a pulse in his neck, and he looks up in panic, and he waves at the referee and the medical team, and the referee and other teammates come running over. And Christian Eriksen is lying completely still. His teammates form a ring around him for privacy and protection, and the TV keeps on filming. And I can see behind the players that the medical team have begun a particular form of first aid, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and that tells me something essential. As Christian Eriksen was running and collapsing, his heart had stopped. He was in a state of what we call cardiac arrest. And what he's having from the team is the most important first aid that will allow him the possibility of surviving. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation is when we try to circulate the blood that is still full of oxygen in the lungs by squeezing the chest, by pressing hard and rhythmically to move that blood full of oxygen to the rest of the body, and particularly to the brain, because if the brain loses its oxygen supply, it dies within a handful, literally a handful of minutes. Without CPR as first aid, he stands no chance. Now then, there will be people in this audience, and it'd be nice to see you if you can put the lights up, who are trained as I am to be able to give CPR. Who are you? Please, will you put your hands up? Put them up really high, and it's okay to turn around. I want you, please, to look around and appreciate each other. I want to say thank you to every one of you for taking that training, for maintaining that training, because unless there are people standing by when somebody that I love, or you love, or we collapse in a state of cardiac arrest, without somebody starting CPR straight away, we stand no chance of survival. With CPR, we stand not a TV chance of survival, you know, CPR at the beginning of casualty, drinking a cup of tea at the end of casualty, not that kind of statistic. 1 person in 10 who has a cardiac arrest will survive to leave hospital well, 1 in 10. But it's 0 in 10 if nobody starts CPR. CPR is vital first aid, and it is a bridge to treatment. And what we see now is we can't see Eriksen. He's hidden by a sea of legs. We can see his boots, and we suddenly see his feet in his boots jump as an electric shock is put across his chest, defibrillation. Has it succeeded? Or has it not succeeded? Well, what we see over the next couple of minutes is that he's brought in a stretcher round, and we can see on the television screen that he's rubbing his eyes, that he's moving his mouth. He looks dazed and confused, and that's not really surprising, is it? But he is very much not dead. And because we're time travelers, what we also know is that in hospital, they will find the cause of his cardiac arrest and treat it so that it doesn't happen again. And that in 9 months' time, he won't just be home with his wife and his family, he will be back at the top of his game, playing football for Denmark again. He had a moment when his heart stopped, when he was dead on the pitch, and yet he lived to tell the tale and to inspire massive numbers of football fans to volunteer to learn CPR. CPR, vital, first aid for when the heart stops and the rest of the body is still in working order. Now, I want to take you now far into the future. I want to go 70 years ahead. And now we are fictionalizing the story because, sadly, I don't have a crystal ball. And although I talked to Joe in the lunch break, we couldn't quite visualize the 70-year gap. But I want you to come into a hospital room with me in Denmark and come in quietly because the old man in the bed here is really, really sick. This man was a footballer for Denmark in his youth. His name is Christian Eriksen, but he's known as Grandpa. He's been very sick for the last few years, and gradually one thing after another has mounted up, and it's likely now that he's very close to the end of his life. He's in bed, and because of my years at the bedsides of dying people, I can see that he's past that early phase of dying where people just run out of energy and need more sleep. He's past that slightly later stage of dying where sleep comes over people unpredictably and they sink in and out of unconsciousness. I can see that he's now in the final stages of dying, where he is safely, deeply unconscious all of the time. And his breathing is coming in automatic cycles that go backwards and forwards, between deep and shallow, between fast and slow. And what I'm expecting is that shortly, in one of the shallow, slow phases of breathing, probably, there'll be a breath out from Grandpa Christian that just isn't followed by another breath in. Because that's what ordinary dying looks like. There's no sudden rush of pain at the end. There's no suddenly sitting up and telling everybody where the treasure is buried. That doesn't happen. It's very gentle. Ordinary dying with well-palliated symptoms. In a room full of love, his wife, his children, his grandchildren, and 500 of us somehow. And then here's a nurse coming in. And the nurse comes over and she looks at Grandpa Christian and she's feeling his wrist, at his pulse at his wrist. And towards the end of life, the pulse becomes very shallow. It's hard to feel. I can see she's checking his neck as well, in fact. Oh, what an echo of long ago. And she turns to the family, and I expect that she's going to say to the family, we're close to the end now, and it's wonderful that you're here, and is everybody in the room who needs to be. But instead of that, she is starting to usher them out of the room. She's pressing a button on the wall. She's shouting, cardiac arrest room 4, and people in scrubs are running in as the family is being rushed out. Somebody's trying to stick a tube down Grandpa's throat. Somebody started CPR compressions on his chest, and as his youngest granddaughter is leaving the room, she can very distinctly hear the crack of a rib under those helping hands. And in 5 minutes or 10 minutes or half an hour, what will happen is that this futile attempt at CPR will be called off and death will be declared, as it is always futile in these very different circumstances. And the family will be brought back into the room to begin their bereavement of Grandpa Christian. The peace has been shattered. What could have been gentle dying with a loving family around him has been traumatized by a medical intervention that was futile. So what just happened? What's the bright idea that we need to take home here? What's just happened is that two really, really important things for us all to understand as humans have both happened in the same room at the same time, and that should not have been allowed to happen. Remember that when Christian Eriksen had his cardiac arrest as a young man, his legs were still running as he went down. In a real cardiac arrest, the heart stops first, and everything else is still working unless its oxygen supply runs out because the heart circulation isn't being maintained by CPR, or the heart cannot ultimately be restarted. Cardiac arrest, the heart stops first. In ordinary dying, there is a gradual winding down of the way our bodies are working, until eventually there is that state of unconsciousness with those breathing cycles that gradually lapse into no breath. And a few minutes after that final breath, because there's no new oxygen coming in through the lungs, that weakened heart will eventually stop beating. In ordinary dying, the heart stops last. This is not a cardiac arrest. But in modern medicine, fueled also by Hollywood and soap operas, we have stopped recognizing that there are two different types of heart-stopping moments. And one of them is a moment to try really hard to save a life. And the other is a moment to stand in awe and respect and love as somebody takes their final breath at the very end of their lives. So my calls to you today, there are two of them. There are 500 people in this room. That means potentially 500 new CPR practitioners. If you take a friend, that'll be 1,000 CPR practitioners for the northeast of England. What a difference we could make if we are in a shopping centre, if we are in a sports centre, if we are in a swimming pool, if we're walking down the street, and somebody suddenly drops down with a cardiac arrest in front of us. We can give them that 10% chance of being able to get to hospital and have their life saved. But also 500 of us with ideas that can time travel, even though we can't, can start to think about ordinary dying, can start to think about the importance of recognizing human mortality, can start to think about, instead of saying to the hospital, do everything I insist, talking to our older relatives, talking to our sick friends, thinking for ourselves, as our lives are drawing to their close, what can be done that doesn't de-dignify my dying? What can be done that ensures that at that moment we treat it with the respect and kindness and absolute awe that it deserves? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yes, okay, good. So, first of all, thank you. Another really interesting talk. So, just so that I'm clear, that the point is that an actual cardiac arrest, as you said, the heart stops first, which then leads to death eventually or ultimately. But that in natural dying, the heart stops at the end of everything else going, and that. But is it standard hospital policy to then still intervene with CPR to try and resuscitate that person that has naturally died versus actually having a heart attack?
Yeah, it's become standard policy. So when CPR was first invented, it was invented for two very specific uses. It's not at all uncommon for people to have cardiac arrhythmias where their heart starts to fibrillate, and it's a chaotic electrical activity, which means that it's not squeezing blood. And people die during that. And the most common treatable cause of cardiac arrest is actually not that the heart is at complete standstill, but it's just kind of wobbling like a jelly and not doing anything. And that's what defibrillation reverses.
Okay.
So after a heart attack, that can happen sometime in the next week or so. Mm-hmm. And so we used to keep people on coronary care units. We'd have a defibrillator in the corner, and we would use CPR while somebody was fetching all of the kit and defibrillate them. And the other risk period that's really well recognized in medicine is at the induction of a general anesthetic with the kind of anesthetic agents that we were using in the 1960s and 1970s. Sometimes cardiac arrest would be a side effect of those drugs, terrifyingly.
Yeah.
But you're safe, you've got an anaesthetist, there's an oxygen supply, they can do CPR, the blood goes through your body, the heart steadies again, you're not at future risk of that happening.
Okay.
So it was a very specific treatment for very specific circumstances. And then it kind of metastasized out into the world.
Right.
This is a way of restarting a stopped heart. And we lost sight of the two different ways in which hearts might stop.
Wow. Okay, so it started spreading into areas that it really shouldn't be in, and that's ultimately the core of your talk, is that this is, first of all, it's not going to work, because even in the best cases, it's only 10%, which is actually a little shocking. I didn't realize it was quite that low. So in the case of grandfather, was it Erickson? It's not going to work. It's basically a 0% chance of success, and you're also destroying this kind of critical moment for the family and his loved ones to share something with him, versus him, being taken away for this obviously invasive, unnecessary practice that is just weird. In America, do we have something called DNR, do not resuscitate orders?
Okay, so to help protect people, we have a status which is really shorthand between clinicians to other clinicians to say, we're expecting this person is going to reach the end of their life. When their heart stops, you might never have met them before. You don't know.
Yeah.
You've got short minutes to save their brain.
Yeah.
So you'd start CPR. So we're telling you. It's called Do Not Attempt CPR, DNA CPR, here in the UK.
Okay.
And we will give people a form, and there are two reasons for the form. The usual reason is that the doctors who are looking after you are saying to you, look, the thing that's wrong with you now is progressing to the phase where it's going to start to shorten your life. And when that happens, we need to protect you from people believing that CPR might help you, because actually it won't. So here is this certificate of protection, if you like. But also, we all have a right to say we don't want treatments that might help us, blood transfusions, antibiotics, surgery, CPR. But you can't object to CPR at the point where somebody's trying to give it to you because you're already unconscious. So you have the form in advance to say, even though I know I will die if you don't give me CPR, I don't want it. Thank you.
Which really plugs into just, I guess, the larger point of a lot of your work, which is around proactively planning about what's happening as you approach your likely passing, depending on your age and condition and things like that. One of which might be that as you enter hospital, that you make sure you take that option for, did you say DNAR?
Yes, do not attempt CPR.
Okay. Do not attempt CPR. Kathryn, thank you so much.
Thanks, Herb.
So.